Welcome to Mormon Book Reviews, where an evangelical encounters the restoration, and a gentleman who probably doesn't need much of an introduction, considering that two of his videos are in my top 10 all-time most watched videos here on Mormon Book Reviews. Of course, Curtis just reminded me that this coming, we're taping on Friday, July 18th, but this coming Monday will be the 3-year anniversary of the announcement of the Joseph Smith daguerreotype, and then Tuesday, the next day, which will probably be the day that we'll be publishing this episode, will be the 3-year anniversary in which I had Lachlan Mackay and John Hamer on to describe this new discovery that had just been published by the John Whitmer Historical Journal. And of course, we're talking about this daguerreotype out there that many, many people are coming around to believing. There seems to be a growing consensus now that this is indeed a photograph of Joseph Smith. Now, of course, I have actually been in communication with other people in the past who've reached out to me who said they have other photos that they believe are Joseph Smith. And I've always responded like anytime you want to come on, you're more than welcome to come on and give your side. And it usually ends up being a dead end. So I don't want people to think that I am total team Curtis Weber and this is absolutely 199% sure Joseph Smith. But Curtis is a good friend, and I feel like he makes a very compelling case. People who have sat down and watched the original 3-hour version and then the one that he did a couple months ago here on Mormon Book Reviews, people actually take the time to watch this. Um, many people come away from it believing that it is indeed Joseph Smith. I actually was talking to a gentleman who, let's say, I don't want to say his name, but he's a top ranked scholar, just recently published a major book. And he had told me that um, he didn't think it was Joseph Smith. And I said, well, why do you say that? And he said, well, I talked to so and so, and I thought it was interesting, but then I talked to a bunch of people at the church historian's office, and they don't think it's Joseph Smith. I'm like, well, that person you talked to is a freshman level 101 course on the Joseph Smith photograph. This is a postgraduate course that Curtis has done on this channel. There's a lot of controversy that comes around this, and there's a lot of people that come out of the woodwork who say this is not Joseph, and of course, you're always welcome to do that. But Curtis has put together a small slide presentation. When I say small, it's just under 200 slides. Okay, so folks, get ready to strap in, get ready because we're gonna go take another adventure in now the other purported photographs of Joseph Smith. And so there have been many claimants that have been made throughout the years. And even Curtis has talked about 15 years ago, he came across a photo that for a while he was absolutely convinced was Joseph Smith. But then as he further dug into it, realized that it wasn't. And then, of course, 3 years ago, when this came out, at first you thought, give me a half hour, I'll probably be able to show this isn't. And then the more you dug and the deeper you got into it, the more compelling of a case you felt that this is indeed Joseph Smith. And probably more than anybody who out there, and there's some great researchers out there, but I think just man hours and time spent on this photo, I'd say Curtis has probably spent more time looking at that photo than anybody, but has also spent a lot of time looking at a lot of other photos. The other claimants to be Joseph Smith. Will the real Joseph Smith please stand up? That would be the question for today's episode. Curtis, sorry for the long intro, but I felt I wanted to give some context. Welcome back to the program.
Thanks, Steve. Great to be here again with you.
So, before we get started with the slide presentation, would you just want a couple minutes to kind of set this up so we can get a better context?
Sure. First, I'll say that it's been fun to read comments and get responses. Some of your viewers and others, people have viewed other video interviews that I've done or in-person presentations. In some cases, have reached out to me, and it's always fun to interact with people and to answer their questions, to hear their feedback, to hear their opinions. I got an email out of the blue from someone who had watched our most recent interview, and he was beyond thrilled. And he said, "I'm retired now, but I've done forensic works in forensic labs, and I've actually made death masks in forensic labs." And he says, "You're absolutely correct about the eyelids being displaced in the death mask, for instance." He says, "When I pushed clay into the corner of the inner corner of the eye sockets to prevent any negative space there, any air from being in the corners of that mold," he says, "I invariably create this displacement of the eyelids." So it was wonderful to hear someone who's had actual real world experience uh, telling me that one of my hypotheses about the death mask is actually correct. And of course, the Larson daguerreotype has evidence that explains that as well. But anyway, it's been a really wonderful thing to get this evidence finally out in front of people and to hear feedback. One of the things I hear very frequently is, well, how I'd love to see you analyze other photos. I mean, you say this is a photo of Joseph, but how would these methodologies, what would the result be if you applied these methodologies to other purported photos of Joseph Smith? So today I'm going to show you about, I don't know, 4, 5, or 6 different analyses that I've done. And
Yeah, and
so I'm going to,
why don't you before you do the screen share, I just wanted to say while you're getting ready, is I want to admit that I probably have a bias towards looking through things through Curtis's lens because I've spent the many hours we've spent on air. We've probably spent even more hours off camera on the phone and doing private Zooms. And so I spent a lot of time with Curtis, and I really feel like the more time I spend with him, the more convinced that I am that this is Joseph Smith. I am very much open to all the photographs that he's going to present today. I'm coming into this thinking I'm very open to the idea that there are other Joseph Smith photographs out there, and I'm also open to the idea that maybe one or some of these might actually be Joseph Smith. So, but I also don't know this subject as well as Curtis does. And so if it comes across like I'm pro Curtis, just to let you know that I will admit that I've spent a lot of time with him and I consider him to be a friend, but I'm always willing and happy to hear from other people and get their perspectives and even have them come on my program. If any of you want to come on and push back on some of this stuff, I'd be more than happy to give you that platform. So, all right, Curtis, why don't you get started?
all right. I also thought it'd be good. Let me know when you can see the screen there.
Yep, there we go.
Here we go, kind of the title slide to our time together here today. Uh, I thought it would be good also to discuss the methodology. So I'm going to go a little bit more in depth about the forensic side, the methodologies of how you would analyze purported photos of Joseph Smith. Now, of course, the first 10 or 12 slides are going to be very familiar to those who have viewed our previous interviews. There are many purported photos of Joseph Smith that have been put forward over the years. I got involved in studying this one in February of 2008. And that really, even though that the outcome of that research wasn't a positive identification as a picture of Joseph Smith, it certainly forced me to dive into this whole world and to figure out or to ask the question of how you could forensically test all these different purported images of the prophet. Now, that background led me to believe that again that Joseph had never been photographed, which is why none of the proposed photos had ever been authenticated. And when this photograph came out in July of 2022, almost 3 years ago, this, like we said, this coming Monday, I was pretty convinced I'd be able to disprove it in no time flat. Now, it's important to understand, and this is a little bit of a review for those who watched our previous interview. Uh, the death masks of Joseph Smith are the single most important forensic artifacts of his appearance. These are the two oldest known sets of masks, the Dibble mask on the left side of the screen and the pedestal mask. The Dibble masks are believed to be copies made from the original molds, potentially, even within a month of, or less than a month after Joseph and Hiram are killed. And then the pedestal mask is believed to be a copy of the Dibble mask made probably no later than 1849. Both of these masks are in the possession of the Church History Museum in Salt Lake City. And these are photographs that I was permitted to take of them back in my initial research on the masks and skulls back in 2008 and 2009. A very crucial detail to understand is the reliability of the mask. The Dibble mask has been damaged and has lost some detail of the hair, whereas the pedestal mask has that evidence present still. But the Dibble mask has finer detail and is older, therefore we believe, and therefore closer to Joseph Smith's face in time, and it's forensically more significant aside from the missing hair. Now, some people doubt that Joseph Smith's death mask is useful for forensic purposes. Some people think of it as art. Some people even propose that it's not even his face, that this is something that somebody sculpted or created. But those of us who believe that this is in fact a death mask made from a mold taken off his actual face. Even among those people, there's some debate about whether or not the lower third of his face in the death mask has been fractured and elongated. This elongated mask hypothesis, it was put forward by individuals who want to explain why their favorite photo or proposed photo of the prophet doesn't match the proportions of the death mask. And as I've told viewers and people in person before, there's only one problem with this theory, and that is that it's demonstrably false. Joseph Smith sat to have his profile traced by Sutcliffe Maudsley um, in June of 1842. And even though we don't have that original profile tracing, Maudsley created several portraits from that tracing. And this one that you see on the screen here is the original portrait that he created for the lithographing of the prophet's picture to appear on the city map of Nauvoo. Now, when you zoom in on that picture, Steve, if you'll recall, and trace the profile of Maudsley's drawing, and then compare that shape by overlaying it on the death masks, both the pedestal or the dibble first and then the pedestal on the right, the only rational explanation for the precision of those correspondences is that both Maudsley's profile tracing, and hence his drawing, and the death masks were derived from Joseph's natural, undistorted face. Now, one thing I didn't talk about much in detail before, due to time, is that we actually have three written accounts by individuals who saw the prophet after he was killed. One, William Clayton, on June 28th, so the day following his death, and then Joseph Hovey and Louisa Pratt on the 29th during the public viewing after the death mask molds were created. And all three of those witnesses who knew Joseph in life quite well testified or wrote that he looked very natural. So any of you or you, Steve, I don't know how many funerals you've ever been to, or open casket funerals. I've probably been to maybe a dozen in the past 2 or 3, 4 years. Most of my older friends from a ward I lived in years ago, many years ago now, have been passing away. And so I've been to a lot of funerals lately. My mission president's wife just passed away at age 92 and went to her viewing as well. A lot of people don't look natural in death. They don't look like themselves. I don't know if you've had that experience. What's your experience been?
Oh, certainly, yeah, yeah. It looks almost like a mannequin sometimes. Kind of looks fake. Yep.
Yeah. And sometimes even hard to recognize that it's the same person. I mean, uh, anyway, uh, but that's actually a quite amazing thing that Joseph looked fairly natural. Now, that doesn't mean there aren't differences between the death mask, capturing his dead face and his living face. In fact, we would expect there to be some changes. I had mentioned this, but I thought I'd put up a slide showing the exact quote. This is from an article that anyone can access online at the NIH National Library of Medicine, the National Institutes of Health. The article is called Postmortem Changes. And there's a particular section that's important to us. As the activity of the bacteria increases during postmortem decomposition, the amount of the putrefactive gases produced rises, causing the distension of the abdomen, swelling of the face, and slippage of skin, all within 18 to 36 hours after the time of death. Now, Joseph's masks, the molds, I should say, the original molds of Joseph and Hiram's faces, are made no earlier than 20, probably closer to 22, maybe even 24 hours after death. We don't know exactly, but we do know they're made the day after they're killed, after they're brought back from Carthage to Nauvoo. Now, that swelling of the face and slippage of skin, we talked a little tiny bit about in our previous interview, and there's certainly evidence that that is the case. Now, we're going to spend a lot of time talking about the death mask, specifically now the 3D model of the oldest known mask. And if you'll recall, I discovered that the oldest known mask fits the Larson Daguerreotype even better due to the fact that the nose in the Dibble mask is about 3% wider than the nose in the pedestal mask. And so since it's an older mask, I trust its three-dimensional shape a little bit more than the pedestal mask. So We're going to play a little bit of a game here, Steve. This is going to be where we're getting into some fun here, talking about the 3D models. Take a look at these three images.
Okay.
Okay.
Hmm.
Simple question for you and for the viewers. Which one of these images is an actual photograph of the Dibble mask of Joseph Smith? What would you guess, Steve?
Okay, when you say which one of these is an actual photograph,
One of
what do you mean?
these is a photograph that I took of the mask in 2008,
Okay.
excuse me, 2009.
Okay.
And two of these images are not.
What are they then if they're not photographs?
Can you tell the difference between these images?
Okay, I'm looking at them and I would say the one on the right seems to be a little darker in the eyes and a little bit more light on the forehead than the other two.
And you would be correct. That is the actual photograph. And it's very hard to replicate lighting in a 3D environment. And so I cheated a little bit by taking the 3D model on the far left here and just applying the highlights and shadows of the photograph through Photoshop, but not actually using any of the the uh, the shape of it, right? So there's different filters you can apply in Photoshop to limit what gets overlain or added to an image to just the highlights or just the shadows.
Okay.
And if I take away those highlights, you can clearly see the difference. Like you said, I did not attempt to light in 3D to replicate the very complex lighting of the Church History Museum's basement, with all of its fluorescent lights and everything, and all the objects in the rooms that would be refracting light or reflecting light onto the mask and so forth. Now, the image in the middle, Steve, is just the 3D mask with the photograph at 50% opacity over the 3D model. So it's a mixture of the two, which you can, as you noted, still has a little bit of difference, a little dimmer because it doesn't have quite the full brightness that the one on the right does. You scored very well on that test. But as you can see, there's very, very almost imperceptible difference between when you apply the same lighting conditions. Very, very little difference. And again, it's mostly in the lighting conditions that you can tell the difference. You can't tell the difference based off shape or any detail in the face.
Okay.
Um, let's see. That is because the Church History Department's 3D model of the mask was made from 285 different photographs taken from 285 different positions using photogrammetry, which is a technology by which you can take X number of photos. You have to have a sufficiently large and varied number of photos. And the computer will look at all of those photos and come out with a hyper accurate 3D model of the object being photographed. The model produced by that process has 2.5 million vertices. And for those who don't know what a vertex is in 3D software and 3D modeling, it's a single point in three-dimensional space. And so you have all of these little tiny points that are connected by edges, and those edges form a face. And so the model has almost 5 million faces. And what that means is this is an extremely highly detailed model of the mask. Now, the model rather, was created with photographs of the mask surrounded by 16 markers and 4 scale bars. These are forensically used markers to help keep the size and scale of the mask correct in the final product. The software takes those 285 photographs using those scale bars and markers and attempts to align them all properly to get a very accurate model. Now, the report that I received from the Church History Library listed that the resolution is 0.245 millimeters per pixel, and that the reprojection error, which is a measure of how accurate the photogrammetry process is, was accurate down to 0.233516 pixels. So I think what you do is you multiply those two numbers to get the actual number of millimeters. I could be wrong on that because I'm not an expert on this software, But I did talk with the person who created the model, and he told me it's under a tenth of a millimeter off. Now, the reason I say that is some people, well, one person in particular has claimed that the 3D model is not accurate to the actual death mask, and that's simply not the case. And the church has a full technical report on the process to show how accurate. This is museum quality replicas that they're creating through this process. Okay. Now, with that out of the way, let's talk about methodologies in face identification. The methodologies I follow are outlined by the Facial Identification Scientific Working Group. This is an organization that came about in the 80s, I believe. I'll have to go back and look at my notes. It was initially developed by the FBI and other law enforcement agencies. It has since become its own independent organization, and there are hundreds of partner organizations that participate in this scientific working group. On their website, it's very simply, they say that their group develops consensus standards, guidelines, and best practices for the discipline of image-based comparisons of human facial features, provides recommendations for research development activities, and advances the state of the science in an ethical manner. Now, Steve, one of the guidelines that this working group puts out is called the Facial Comparison Overview and Methodology Guidelines. And I'm going to review just a few highlights from this PDF, which is publicly available online. You can search on it and read it to your heart's content. It's not very long. I think it's 7 or 8 pages long. Definition of facial comparison. Facial comparison is a manual process conducted by a human which entails identifying similarities and dissimilarities between two or more images or an image and a live subject to determine whether they represent the same or different person. Pretty straightforward. It makes sense to us. There are 3 broad categories of facial comparison. Assessment, which is quick real-time comparison and is the least rigorous of the 3 categories. This is the type of thing that happens when a TSA agent at the airport looks at your photo on your license or your passport and looks up at your face, and he does a quick in his mind using his own brain power, his own eyes. Do they look like the same person at all to me or not? Right? That's the type of thing that is considered the least rigorous form of identification in this for forensic purposes. The next would be considered a review. This is the next category, a review. Now, as they note, there's a broad range of purposes and levels of rigor when doing a review. This is more like when you sit down a victim of a crime, say a mugging, and you are looking at mug shots, and you want to see if they could pull out the perpetrator, or if they do a police lineup. They can spend more time than you have typically when a cop pulls you over or a TSA agent's looking at your driver's license, and they can, ask you to turn sideways, or they can look at pictures of, in profile versus straight on. And, in a police lineup, sometimes they have them speak. So if the criminal, said, give me your purse or something, can you recognize their voice? But in terms of facial comparisons, a review is a little more in depth than an assessment, but it's still not the highest level. The highest level is considered to be examination, where you perform a very detailed analysis, and you use this level of detail in forensic applications, and is considered the most rigorous form of facial comparison. And a lot of us, like my gut reaction when I first saw the Larson Daguerreotype, that was an assessment level, right? And my second thought as I looked at it and began spending a little more time was, oh, that's interesting though. His lower third of his face is really tall. That's interesting because most pictures fail to match the vertical portions of Joseph's face, especially in that lower third of the face. I was beginning to move a little bit into the review section, but what I really needed to do was jump into examination and to go into the various levels or the types of methodologies that can be employed in a forensic examination of faces. So there are 3 recognized facial comparison methods. They are morphological analysis, which is a fancy term for shape comparison, superimposition, which is simply placing images on top of each other, and photoanthropometry. Now, I'm going to describe each of these briefly and show an example of two of them. Let's talk about photoanthropometry first. It's a big fancy word, but basically what it means is the measurement of dimensions and angles of anthropometric landmarks or facial and anatomical landmarks of the face and other facial features visible in an image in order to quantify characteristics and proportions. The measurements taken from one image are compared to the measurements taken from a separate facial image. Now, I'm going to point out again, this is the explicit measurement of dimensions and angles. That's photoanthropometry. Now, this might be a little surprising, but the Facial Identification Scientific Working Group does not recommend using this method at all. In fact, they kind of say it shall not be used here. Photoanthropometry shall not be used as an independent comparison method or in conjunction with another method for facial comparison in any of the three categories that we talked about: assessment, review, or examination. I'm not going to get into it too much, but there's reasons for that. It's very, very difficult to take someone's face and to get real measurements and off that image that would be in any sense forensically reliable enough to measure against the measurements taken from another image. And we're going to talk about why that might be. You can, in face recognition software, will do things like reduce a person's face to geometric relationships between features. And they try to create these models, even in 3D now, to try to be more accurate. And I think as the technology improves, this prohibition or this recommendation against photoanthropometry might one day be overturned. But I do not use photoanthropometry in my research because I know that I can't measure the distance in terms of millimeters between anyone's eyes in a photograph. I can't measure the width of their mouth or the height of their nose. You just can't do that unless you were somehow had forensic mapping of dimensions to the face. And even then, you have three-dimensionality to worry about in a two-dimensional image that you can't necessarily measure very accurately. So that leaves us with the first two categories of facial analysis, and that are methodologies, I should say. The first is morphological analysis, which is the direct comparison of class and individual facial characteristics without explicit measurement. That's that very caveat that prohibits photoanthropometry. It is the method of facial comparison in which features and components of the face are compared. Morphological analysis in some form shall be the primary approach used for facial comparison in all categories. Again, assessment, review, and examination. Morphological analysis is based on the evaluation of the correspondence among facial features, components, and respective component characteristics. And that, for example, would mean the presence or absence of a feature, the shape of a feature, the appearance, how does it look, the symmetry or asymmetry of a feature, the location, the relative proportion of features to each other, and so forth, right? So there's a broad range of things that can be done in a morphological analysis. Now, morphological analysis is highly dependent on the quality and quantity of the facial features and characteristics that can be compared. Image quality can be affected by factors including, but not limited to, image resolution, lighting, focus, pose, angle, orientation, and obstructions of facial features. Does that make sense? It's like if I can see half of Steve Pineker's face, maybe in profile, and then I try to compare it to a photograph of you, face on, there are going to be some natural limitations because I can't see half your face, and I'm being presented two different views of the three-dimensional form of your face, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now, in facial analysis, a lot of times you're getting a mugshot or a series of photographs of an individual, and you're comparing it to, like, say, CCTV or security camera footage, a still from a video, or a still from someone's doorbell, camera, their camera, a Ring camera or something at their doorbell. the quality of the image matters. And as we'll see, some of the proposed images of Joseph Smith have very poor quality images. They're either overexposed or very blurry or tarnished or all of them, all of the above. And that makes the analyses a bit harder to do. But we'll go through and talk about that in a second. Now, an example of a morphological comparison, what I consider to be a very low-level morphological comparison, is the one I showed, my very initial comparison of the Larson Daguerreotype to the death mask, just checking the vertical spacing, the proportions of the eyes to nose to mouth to chin, right? Very low level. Another example is the contour comparison, where now I started to examine the shapes and to compare the shapes from the face, in this case, the Larson Daguerreotype, compared to the death mask. That would be a morphological comparison. All right, the next category is superimposition, which is the process of creating an overlay of two aligned images and comparing them visually. Superimposition shall never be used as a standalone approach for facial image comparison and used only in conjunction with morphological analysis. Superimposition can be applied only when two images are taken from the same viewpoint. Images may be photographs, frames, or images from video, or images synthesized from 3D face or head models. Images are aligned, meaning scaled and rotated, with each other. Now, an example, and I do use superimposition on occasion, and the example here is where I've put the photograph of Frederick Granger William Smith, the second oldest surviving son of Joseph and Emma, over the painting of his father. And that's the image on the left. And on the right, I've put the Larson Daguerreotype unreversed over the painting. Now, there are some natural limitations using this methodology. It's very easy, or I guess very often, almost always, details can be obscured by this process. It's hard. You can see clearly, like for instance, on the image on the right, you can see the difference in the nose, the kind of ghosting occurring between the nose of the painting and the nose of the locket. But it's hard to know exactly which is which unless you've been looking at the two images separately and you know. If I were just to send this image to you cold turkey and say, hey, do you see how well they match? You would be like, well, yeah, maybe. But you know what I'm saying? It's kind of hard.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why it's nice to be able to use this only, or you should only use this in conjunction with a morphological comparison, the tracing of shapes or the use of cephalometric landmarks and so forth, okay? Now, continuing about superimposition for a second, because this is going to introduce an important variable or topic that we need to discuss briefly as well. There should be a concordance between images in all aspects of angle and perspective to avoid distortion of the spatial distribution of facial features and characteristics. Practitioners should use tools which preserve shapes and shall not use image processing techniques which may skew the images, facial proportions, or shapes. So this is the idea that you need to be as close as possible to matching perspective distortions and so forth, so that you can do an apples to apples comparison, right? I could take a photo of your face, Steve, from 10 feet away, and I could take in the same lighting conditions with the same camera, I could move 2 feet away, and I could then compare the resulting pictures and say, see, they're not the same shape. But obviously, you're still the same person, right? So we're going to play another little game here, Steve. And this one's kind of fun because it's which image shows the actual shape of the mask? What would you say? The one on the left or the right?
I would say
Can
the
you
ac-
see a difference between them?
yeah, the one on the right is narrower than the one on the left. And so, but let's see. I'm looking at the hmm. Okay, okay, which image shows the actual shape of the mask? Well, when you first popped this up on the screen, I immediately looked at the right one on the right and thought that was it. But yeah, I think it's probably, well, I don't know. This is a tough one, but I think it might be the one on the right.
Okay, here's what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna help you see the difference by taking away the one on
Okay.
the right, and
Okay.
I'm gonna switch to the one. I'm gonna switch between the two images over each other so you can see the change. You watch
Yeah.
that process, right? I'm gonna go back
Mhm.
and do it again. You see the nose gets larger and the
Yeah.
brows are higher, the cheeks are more, okay?
Okay.
I'm gonna go back between them. Okay, that's the difference. Okay. Now the answer, Steve, is that these are the exact same mask at the exact same angle with the exact same lighting with the exact same camera lens. The only difference between them is the distance of the camera from the mask.
Okay. Got it.
Okay, that's that a
Mhm.
demonstration of the perspective problem. Like, look at my hand in the video. If I move it forward, it looks massive. That's only because it's closer to the camera. If
Mhm.
it's right up against my face, it's more in proportion to my face, right? So distance from your subject is the number one factor that you have to consider.
Well,
Now,
that's a
when I did
great
that,
illustration. I appreciate that.
that's exactly why I did it, to help people understand what the real issue is here when you're doing these types of comparisons. Now, back in 2008, 2009, I was limited in what I could do. To avoid distortion of perspective as much as possible, I placed the camera about 8 feet away. After talking to some professional photographers, they said that should be sufficient. Um, and I was limited. I only used 105 millimeter. I had one camera on a tripod, 105 millimeter lens. And I was limited also by the fact that I had to build a rig and then I had to move it using my eyes. I used also a laser level to help me try to be very accurate. And I would then, move it 1 degree at a time and tilt it 1 degree at a time. And I had printed out, protractors and compasses and stuff to on the rig itself to help me be able to do that. But it was a very manual process. With the 3D model now available to the public, I've replicated that process by creating essentially a 3D rig in free 3D software, Blender in this case. Um, and that little rig is just a little cube placed behind the mask, so it doesn't obscure my view of the mask from most angles. And I can actually in the software hide it or view it, according to my wish. Um, there's the pivot point for the rig, which is just back behind. It's similar to where my pivot point was in my physical rig. I've actually scaled the masks to match the actual measurement of the height of the actual depth mask. And I've tried to bifurcate or place the mask directly in the center of that pivot point and have it positioned such that it's exactly down the middle of the face as much as possible. The mid sagittal plane is the theoretic theoretical plane that divides your body into left and right halves. None of us are perfectly symmetrical. Someone might try to set up their own mask in a rig. They might be slightly different than I am, but that was my good faith best attempt to center the mask on the rig exactly. And then in 3D software now, I can place the digital or the 3D camera anywhere, and I can change its attributes. I can move it closer or further from the from the rig pivot point, and I can change the lens, and I can change the lighting, and I can rotate the cameras, and I can apply multiple cameras so I can see it from different angles all at once. It's really amazing what can be done in 3D software. I can do a million times more than I used to be able to do, especially because now I can rotate the mask in terms of its pitch, tilt, and rotation. I can change that down to the thousandth of a degree, whereas before I was really kind of forced to try to do it by hand by 1 degree at a time. So you can be extremely precise in this process. Now, here's another little detail I need to share with everybody. This is a view of that mask and that rig at with the camera lens set at 40 millimeters. Okay, this is the exact same mask with the exact same lighting set up on the rig using an 80 millimeter lens. Now, the distance to the mask is exactly the same, 1.25 millimeters from the pivot point of the rig, I should say, which is the mask. The mask and the rig are pivoting on that central point. You see the distance is not changed, but the mask has gotten larger. Now, all that has done, it hasn't changed the shape. What it's done, if I take the 40 millimeter image and I double its size, 40 to 80, and then I make it translucent, and then put it over the 80 millimeter image, you can see all I've done is make it slightly blurrier, but it hasn't changed the shape of the mask. So this demonstrates again that it's not the lens itself that is causing the distortions. It's almost 99% of that any potential distortion to an image is simply the distance that you move. So when a photographer changes lenses, because it reframes the subject, if I threw on the 80 millimeter lens, I might step back to get more of the surrounding. Or conversely, I might step closer to get more detail to reframe. And it's the movement of the camera back and forth that's the main problem. There's just another way of seeing that, right? So to demonstrate this just one more time, I'm going to show you 4 different camera positions relative to the exact same model and in the same lighting conditions. Here's 1.5 meters rather from the mask, just under 5 feet. Now I'm going to cut the distance in half and watch the changes, Steve. You see that slight change? I'll go back.
Mm-hmm.
Just looks like it kind of puffs, right?
Okay. Yep. Mm-hmm.
And now I'm going to cut that distance in half and look at that drastic of a change. So
Yep.
it's an exponential curve. The closer I get, the greater the amount of perspective distortion. So for instance, I'm going to go from 0.375 meters back to 1.5 and look at the difference.
Mm-hmm.
That's quite the difference. Now, I think I have here as a bonus, there's 3. So the difference from 1.5 to 3 is slightly noticeable. And then here's 3 to 4. Did you see a change?
Go back and do that again.
3 to 4.
I
I can see it's very, very slight.
yeah.
It's very hard at anything past about 8, 9 feet to beyond. It'll be very hard for you to notice a difference without measuring it and doing this A/B comparison right on top of each other. It's very, very difficult. Okay. So there's back to 4. Now, with that, we're going to dive into actually looking at potential photos of Joseph that have been proposed over the years. And we're going to apply this understanding and these methodologies to the analysis of these photos. Okay. So the first is what I like to call Brazilian Joseph. I call it that because it was discovered in a publication in Portuguese from Brazil, and the daguerreotype itself is actually located in a museum in Brazil. I won't bother going into all the details of it, but since it is a daguerreotype, the first thing I decided to do when testing it is what, Steve? Flip it, right? Because almost all daguerreotypes are backwards. So if this were a daguerreotype of the prophet made, and it wasn't a daguerreotype of a daguerreotype, or it wasn't made with a reversing prism, which almost all daguerreotypes were not daguerreotypes of daguerreotypes or made with reversing prism, then it would be presenting a backwards reversed mirror image of his face. Okay. Now I'm going to zoom in a little tighter on the face here, and I'm going to trace some of the prominent contours of the left brow, the nose, the mouth, and then the side of the face. And then I'm going to show you my best anatomical fit of Joseph's mask when I've adjusted the rotation, pitch, and tilt at 4 meters from the mask. So this is the scale or the result at 4 meters. You get a pretty decent match at the brow, pretty decent at the nose. There's some differences, but hey, I'm gonna give them as a, he had his nostril stuffed, so it could be changing the shape of the nostrils a little bit. So I'm not going to be too nitpicky on the nostril shape. It's really good at the lower position of the lower lip, but it doesn't match the width of the forehead. The forehead in the daguerreotype is a little bit wider, not much, but you can see it peeking out there on the edge. It doesn't match the width or the position of the cheek. The daguerreotype cheek is much higher, and it's a little bit wider. And it doesn't match the jaw at all. The jaw is much wider. And the mouth, the upper lip, is very tall. And the chin also doesn't match very well at all. The chin in the mask is much lower or much larger, right? So that's at its best overall fit that I've been able to achieve. 3 or 4, correspondences and almost double that number of differences. Now, what happens if you change the perspective and move the camera closer? Well, that causes the nose to appear larger, and so therefore I have to scale the mask down to fit the nose better. And now you've got matches again at the brow, at the nose. Let's say the lower lip is still acceptable. Maybe there's a slight difference in depth. let's just say the chin is now a bit more acceptable. There could have been swelling that would have caused the chin to be a little bit larger. I'll give that. But you still have the problem at the forehead and at the cheek. You still have a problem at the jaw, and you still have a problem at the lip, at the upper lip. So you've added maybe one correspondence and removed a difference between the two, but you still haven't got to matching everywhere. Okay. Now let's go even closer. This is 1.25 meters. Uh, Again, brow, nose. Now the Cupid's bow is starting to touch where it does in the mask. The chin is much better now. So here we've got another, 4 or 5 correspondences, but all the problems still exist, except now that the lower lip now doesn't match because now the upper lip is closer to matching. Makes sense, right? I can't get the mask to fit this man's face, and I have tried scores and scores and scores of angles and distances to make it match. Now, what if they're wrong or not they're wrong, but what if the daguerreotype is a daguerreotype of a daguerreotype? It's a bit blurry, so maybe it's not a very high quality image because it's a copy of a daguerreotype. So let's test it the opposite direction. Well, oh my goodness, Steve, at the brow, the nose, the Cupid's bow, the chin is, we'll give it to him. Look at the cheek. That's much closer to the right cheek, much, much closer. But the jaw is massively wider on that side of the face compared to the mask. The lip is much taller in the daguerreotype, and the lower lip is much lower in the daguerreotype. And the daguerreotype cheek is much larger, much larger. In fact, I'm going to zoom in on just the cheek here, and that white line is where Joseph's nasolabial fold is in the mask, and that red line is where it is in the daguerreotype. I'll take away the mask. I'll take away the red lines just so you can see how they do not have the same cheek structure at all. Cheeks may puff, but they don't enlarge downward. They would enlarge outward, right?
Oh.
At least not very much, even with the swelling and slippage of skin that could be captured in the mask. Now here's the mouth up close, and now I'm going to scale the mask to its best overall fit to the height of the mouth. That's a pretty good match. It's not too bad. I would look at that and say, the width isn't quite right, but the height and the shape of that central portion and the portion on the right side of the screen, that's a really close match. That's pretty good. But when you do that, Steve, look how big you have to make the mask.
Right. Yeah.
It simply doesn't match the proportions of Joseph's face. So I'm going to give this Brazilian Joseph a possibility score of next to absolute 0. It's simply doesn't match the known anatomy as depicted in the death mask. Okay, let's move on to our second image. This is the famous Library of Congress photo. It was created by W.B. Carson and submitted by Joseph Smith III to Congress, Library of Congress, in 1879. That's going to be an important year that we're going to talk about a little bit more in a second. Now, if you go to the Library of Congress website and scroll down to its description, I'm going to zoom in on it so you can see exactly what it says. The Library of Congress says that it's a portrait photo or copy of a drawing or painting. Now, that's an interesting claim. That's what the Library of Congress says it is. Some people think that this is a photo of the painting. So we need to ask that question. Is it just a photo of the painting? Or, as some people believe, is this a painting from the photo, the Library of Congress photo? Now, you can be forgiven for believing that the two must be related, because if you compare them very carefully, and I'm going to do is I'm going to merge the two faces so you can see how precisely they correspond. It is a very, very tight correspondence. Now, I had to increase the width of the daguerreotype image, or the Library of Congress image, rather, in order to make it fit the width, because there's a little perspective distortion change. Daguerreotypes and paintings, daguerreotypes are very hard to photograph. And if you're making a copy of a daguerreotype of a painting, which we'll see, actually, I won't be showing it, but that happened in Utah in 1885. There can be little distortion changes when you're replicating pictures, especially if you're taking photographs that are not perfectly square 90 degrees to the object that you're photographing, if it's a flat two-dimensional painting and so forth, okay? So the question is simply, we're going to talk a little bit about the painting as a quick review. We don't know. This is the most famous painting of Joseph in existence. We don't know who painted it or when. It was once attributed to William Major, and then it was attributed to artists unknown for many decades. And then more recently, it's been attributed to David Rogers, who we know for a fact did paint a portrait of Joseph in September of 1842. Now, we do know that it was owned by Emma and that she passed it on to her son Joseph III before she died in 1879. She dies at the end of April. And that Joseph passed it on to his son, Frederick, sometime prior to 1910. We'll talk about that date in just a minute. And that it was passed from Frederick to the RLDS Church, and Community of Christ sold it to the Salt Lake Church in March of 2024 as part of the package deal with the Kirtland Temple and Nauvoo properties and buildings and so forth, and other Smith family artifacts. Now, I'm going to fast forward to 1910 right now, because in 1910, an artist in Utah named Lewis Ramsey painted a new portrait of the prophet Joseph Smith. And an article about this portrait and an image of the painting was published in the Salt Lake Tribune on March 5th, 1910. A copy of that newspaper made its way to Joseph Smith III, and this is what he had to say about it in a letter that he wrote in response. 5 days after the paper was printed, he received it and wrote a letter that day to the Salt Lake Tribune. I noticed in your issue of Saturday morning, March 5th, 1910, a copy of which was handed to me by a neighbor, a cut purporting to represent a life-size portrait of my father, Joseph Smith, painted by a Utah artist. I do not regret to see the picture, but I do regret to know that all the reverence that is said to be held by the people of Utah towards Joseph Smith, the first president of the church, they know so little about the appearance of the man. He was not happy with this painting, okay? Now, one of his complaints is the following. The picture in the Tribune looks like it had been made up of a composite of superimposed photograph, creating an ideal face. It represents him wearing a ring on his right hand. The only ring he ever wore was worn on his left hand. So one of the little details, he's like, you're just not even getting his appearance right. And you don't even have little details like which hand did he wear his ring on. Now, Joseph then, in the same letter, actually a little bit before this paragraph, he says, there is an authentic oil painting now in the possession of my son, Frederick M. Smith. Remember, we talked about it being passed to Frederick prior to this letter being written in 1910, at Independence, Missouri, painted by the same artist that painted one of my uncle, Hiram Smith, which has formed a basis of pictures of him, meaning Hiram, since his family went to Utah. It fortunately happens to us that this portrait, painted in 1843, is sustained in its characteristic likeness to my father by the daguerreotype in our possession, taken the same year, I think by an artist by the name of Lucien Foster. Now, he's wrong about the year the painting was painted, if this is in fact the David Rogers painting, or at least the year that it was started. I've heard some theories that maybe David Rogers started this painting in 1842 and then didn't finish it, and then it's produced later, finished and delivered later. Okay, we have no documentation. That's purely speculation. But the point of this is Joseph presents this as an authentic image of his father. There's one little issue, Steve. He's wearing his ring on his right hand.
Yeah.
Just like the painting that he's complaining about, right? It's a really funny detail in the story. But this has led people to speculate that why would he complain about the ring being on the wrong hand if he knew his dad wore it on the left? He knows what the painting, right? So he must believe that the painting is backwards. And why would it be backwards? It's because it's based on a daguerreotype and not live sittings, right? Mm-hmm. Now, you and I have talked about this before. I'll go over this really briefly. I have found forensically solid evidence that, in fact, the painting is indeed backwards. Here's Joseph's death mask split in half, and then each half is mirrored. So the blue portion is the mirrored halves. And take away the blue, you can clearly see that he has a wider right half of his death mask compared to his left. Okay, so when you take the left half mirrored, it's very narrow compared to the right. Well, the painting has the same exact asymmetry, but on the opposite sides, which indicates that the face is backwards. We talked about the nose curvature in the death mask. how Joseph's nose is slanted slightly to his left, and the tip kind of curves back towards his right. And if you compare that curvature to the curvature in the painting, it's not going in the same direction. You have to reverse the curvature of the death mask, and you can see it a little better if you add some filters to the image of the painting. But the nose is gently curved in the opposite direction. Then I gave you some new evidence in our last interview that I had discovered that if you look carefully at the shape of the nostrils and the height of the relative position of the nostrils and the nasal labial folds and compare that to the death mask, uh, you can get a good match at one nostril or the ala, the flesh over that nostril, but it doesn't match the other, either top or bottom. The position doesn't match, and the actual uh, shallow channels where the nasolabial folds are in Joseph's face in the death mask are in different positions. And then we talked about very curiously, though, if you take the death mask and flip it, you get a beautiful match to all of that. And in fact, I would say not only is it a beautiful match, it's a near perfect match. And it's a very curious thing. Of course, the death mask isn't backwards, and I'm doing this flipping in Photoshop or in PowerPoint in this case. That means the painting is backwards. Now, another detail that we talked about is the fact that the painting doesn't match the vertical proportions of Joseph's face in either Maudslay's drawing or the death mask. The Maudslay's drawing and the death mask match each other. The painting does not match. It has a much taller nose. Okay. Another way to see that we looked at is by marking the position of the width and the base of the nose and then tracing the shape of the mouth and then overlaying the 3D model of the death mask. And I've done this at different distances. There's no distance of moving the camera closer or further away that causes the mouth to rise that high to get closer to the nose, while at the same time preserving the width of the nose, right? I can obviously keep shrinking the entire death mask image until it lines up the height of the mouth and the position of between the nose and the height between the nose and the mouth, but then the width is completely off. That's just massively too short of a philtrum in the painting, or conversely, the nose is simply too tall. So here, if you match the height of the lips, you're simply way off the actual height of Joseph's nose, and the width of the mouth is wrong. And we talked about how you have to shrink the width of the mask for some reason to fit the width of the mouth in the painting. Now, when I was looking at this, Steve, I also had noted, and I just had never done the work, that the shape of the upper lip doesn't seem to match very well. And I thought, well, let me examine that differently by lighting the mask from below now and lighting it straight up and trying to get the asymmetries of his upper lip highlighted by the way the light is placed. That light is perfectly centered on the mask down below. And you can shrink the width of the mask, again, 18%, and that shape matches even less than it did before. But Steve, what do you think we're going to try next?
Uh, you tell me, because I am just processing so much information right now. And I do have a
We're going to
question for you
reverse it,
too.
Steve. Watch what happens when
Okay.
you
You
reverse
reverse
the
it. Oh,
death
okay. Yeah,
mask.
yeah, yeah. Now it matches. Okay. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Uh-huh.
So now we have the nose, the nasolabial fold, and the shape of his upper lip
Okay.
are irrefutable evidence that the painting is indeed backwards.
Okay.
So,
Okay. So this is the question I have for you. Why?
sure.
Okay, so your hypothesis is that Frederick Smith was actually sitting in to do the body of the painting. So he was using, and then the artist was then using the photograph of Joseph that then he put the head on. But why would the body be reversed on the painting? Because it's not a photo. I mean, that's not a daguerreotype. So why wouldn't you have had it on the left hand side?
The body I don't think is reversed. I think the body, in fact, the body might be fiction. It might be pure fiction, meaning some artists would pre-paint the bodies and the backgrounds, and they would be
Okay.
traveling around selling, and then they would just put people's faces into the painting.
Oh,
So some have proposed that's a possibility.
okay.
It could be that he was using Frederick's body for position and then kind of created this idea of what the body would look like. But the body is not backward. It's the face that's backwards.
Now, just so I understand too, back then, what was the convention of wearing wedding rings? If a painter were to pre-make a body before the painting, why would they choose the right over the left? Was there a lot of just fluidity when it
That
came to that back then?
Yeah, so this I have heard conflicting things by talking to people. I haven't seen anything definitive by an expert with some evidence behind it. I've heard people say it didn't matter which hand the wedding ring was on. I've heard people say that very early on it became the left hand because it's closer to the heart, kind of thing. You hear people say that today sometimes. I don't know what to believe other than if in fact it was worn on the left more commonly, then there's no reason to believe that it was pre-painted. Because again, why would you paint it? Uh, and the ring itself, and if you look at it carefully, we won't do it here. The ring actually looks to my eye like it was added to the painting. It doesn't look very skillfully done, and
Okay.
it looks like it's a little more sloppily done to my untrained, unprofessional eye.
So
So
the
it
question
could
I
be that that was added later. I don't know.
so I'm just kind of surprised that Joseph Smith III would make that claim because he died Joseph died when he was relatively young, and how would Joseph Smith III even know that Joseph wore his wedding ring on his left hand?
Well, I mean, he lived with his mom for years and
Right.
he saw this painting and they could have had conversations about it.
Okay. So she could have
But
even
but
said like the painting shows it on his right hand, but actually he wore it on his left hand.
now this is again why some people say Joseph Smith III probably knew that the painting was backwards based off that single fact. He's so vehement or so strong in his denunciation of the Lewis Ramsey portrait about the ring being on the right hand when his has it on the same exact hand. So does he not know that? And so people think, some people have speculated that he probably knew that the painting was based on a daguerreotype that was a mirror image of his face. So the question is this picture from the Library of Congress an actual photograph of the prophet or not? Right.
Right.
Now,
Mhm.
I think people who have put two and two together, logically, the answer we already know is no, because it matches the painting. And the painting doesn't match the mask. We just showed that. Okay.
Okay.
The question of whether the image is backwards or not is not an issue. It's a non-starter
Okay.
because it could be a daguerreotype mirror image of his face that it's backwards. This image on the right could be a mirror. If it was created from an original daguerreotype, then it would be a mirror image of his face. But the exact same proportions that we tested with the death mask and the painting are here in the Library of Congress image, which is not a surprise, right? The distance is too great. You can scale the mouth and get the shape.
Mhm.
Now you still have that same gap, and the mouth is too wide. And again, if you shrink it, the width of the death mask 18%, then it matches, right?
Mhm.
Now, that is a 100% solid forensic answer. It does not match Joseph's death mask, period. Now, we also have some documentary evidence. So remember the year 1879. That's the year that Emma dies. She dies at the end of April 1879. In the Saints Herald, the RLDS newsletter, or I don't know if they call it a magazine or a periodical, there is a little advertisement on page 258 of that paper, if I remember the page number correctly, which reads as follows. We now have on hand and subject to order photographic copies of the only authentic front view painting of Joseph the Martyr in existence. This portrait was taken by a painter from New York when Joseph was about 36 years of age. That would have been 1842, and represented him as he appeared at that time. Has remained in the possession of Emma until near the close of her life, when it was committed to the hands of President Joseph Smith III, with permission to have it copied, copyright secured. And in fact, we know that that's exactly what happened. Joseph Smith III gets possession of the paintings of Joseph, his father, and Emma, his mother. He ships them, crates them up, ships them to a photographer in another city in Illinois. And then W.B. Carter somehow gets involved. This is a second photographer that's involved. And the Carter version of that replica of the painting is then sent to the Library of Congress. Joseph III is advertising this. He is the editor of this newsletter, right? He's the president of the RLDS Church, and he is advertising photographs of the painting of his father as a painting. It's 100% a painting. So the possibility score of this being an actual photograph of Joseph Smith is, again, I don't know how much lower you can get than 0.0, but if there were a probability below that, I would go below that because this is a photograph of the painting.
Okay.
Now, okay, I'm not going to go into every single variant of this picture, but I'm going to go to another one, which has been released several years ago. This is a carte de visite or CDV that's owned by Kim Marshall, who found it in if I remember the story correctly, a photo album that she inherited from her grandmother when she passed. And you can go to Kim's website and look at all her evidence that this is the actual true photograph of the prophet Joseph Smith. And in fact, there is an artist by the name of David Lindsley who has a series of videos about the Larson Daguerreotype saying that this is not a photo of Joseph. He says that the Larson Daguerreotype is a photo of Hiram Smith, as he claims here, as you see on the right side of the screen. And in that same video series, he claims that Kim Marshall's CDV is a copy of an actual daguerreotype, an actual photograph of Joseph Smith. I will say that Kim contacted me, gosh, I don't even remember what year it was. If you go on YouTube and look for the ABC4 video interview with Kim and about this picture, that's the year that she first contacted me. I was a little surprised by Kim. We corresponded a little bit, and then she said, "Hey, can you meet me in Salt Lake on such a date and time?" Absolutely, and we can sit and we can talk about my analysis. She met me in a parking lot of a fast food restaurant and said, "Hey, can you follow me to? We're going to go to a meeting at a hotel." I said, "Okay." We get there, and then there's Barb Smith from ABC4 News and a cameraman, and they want to interview me to go on the news about I'm the photo expert who's going to verify this. Kim hadn't even asked me my opinion. So they talked to a historian saying what a remarkable find it is. They talked to Kim about her grandma and how excited she is about this. Then they turn to me and they say, "What is your opinion, Mr. Forensic Expert?" Which is funny because I'm not a credentialed expert of any kind, and I didn't know I was going to be interviewed on camera.
Oh my
Right?
goodness.
And I said, "Well, she has a very nice photograph of the painting." And I was nervous. I couldn't stop looking at the camera. It was like, no, look at Barb. It was just an awkward situation, right?
Oh,
Uh, Imagine if you started talking to me for the first time, Steve, over email, and then you said, "Hey, meet me in at Apollo Burger in Salt Lake," and then you show up with your lights and camera and you want to
yep.
interview me on the spot, right? It was just kind of awkward, right?
Oh
Now,
man.
suffice it to say, I didn't make the final cut for what the piece that actually the segment that aired on the news that night. But it was a funny story. Um, Now, let me address real quick some of these claims by David Lindsley. I've already shown that this 100% is not a photograph of Hiram because it doesn't correspond to Hiram's death mask well at all. Hiram's hair is different. His eyes are further apart. Hiram's nose is taller and even slightly wider than the face in the Larson daguerreotype. Hiram's lips are a little thinner, and his chin is actually a little bit wider. And if you scale the mask to get the best eye fit, you can get a beautiful fit at the eyes and at the nose. Like I'm scaling it to match the nose best. Solves the eye problem. But the nostril shape is still not right, and the entire lower third of the face is completely the wrong scale, right? That was my 2D analysis that I had done very early on in this process. Well, as viewers will remember, if they've watched our previous interview from a few months ago, I've also done three-dimensional correspondence comparisons to both Hiram's mask and Joseph's mask. And when you compare those three-dimensional contours, I can get about 5 or 6 correspondences to Hiram's mask, but everywhere else it doesn't match. Whereas with the Joseph Smith death mask, I can get very precise correspondences to very specific features of the shadows in the face in the Larson daguerreotype. So this 100% is not Hiram, despite his claims. And I can show that, and people can, I'm not going to go over it in detail today, but this is a photograph of the prophet Joseph Smith, not of Hiram, since it doesn't match either in two-dimensional analysis or three-dimensional analysis to Hiram's mask. But what about his claim that this is an actual photograph? He actually claims that the photograph came first and that the reason the painting matches the photo is because it was used, and that's why the painting is backwards, is because this copy of a daguerreotype was used to paint this painting of Joseph. Now, other people have long speculated or said, now this is just a photo, the other direction. This is just a photo from the painting or of the painting, right? Now, I've looked at both claims very carefully, and I can tell you that there are differences, significant differences, and I'm just going to show you a couple, between Kim Marshall's CDV image and the painting itself. Here you can look at differences in the pupil and the catchlight in the pupil, even the shape of the pupil to a degree. Uh, in the painting, you have this anatomically incorrectly drawn inner corner of the left eye, the medial canthus. That's been corrected. That's different, I should say, and more anatomically correct in Kim Marshall's image, even though it's a bit blurry here. It certainly does not have the same problem. You can see that the upper eyelid fold is not connected to it. That's the anatomical problem with the painting. If you look at the noses, it's very clear that the nose in the painting is awkward because the nostrils are way too small. That thickness of flesh around the nose is not in the death mask. But the nose in Kim Marshall's image the nostril is quite different, and the flesh around the ala is much thinner and much more believable, much more lifelike. Okay, so I actually like the nose in Kim's image better than the nose in terms of overall aesthetic to the nose in the painting. Now, I won't go into all the details, but I've compared them very carefully, top to bottom, and I've identified at least 27 anatomical differences, shape differences specifically, between Kim's image and the painting, which means this is not photographic copy of the painting, period.
Okay.
She's absolutely right. Okay. Curious, right? What is it then?
Yes.
Well, I'm going to show you how beautifully it matches Joseph Smith's death mask. Trace the shape of the lips in Kim's image, and I'm going to put the mask on it at its best mouth fit. Isn't that stunningly precise? I mean, that's something if I were to see that, just that, I would go, oh my gosh, that's amazing. The only problem, Steve, is to arrive at that match, you have to put the mask at that scale.
Mm-hmm.
Because again, the mouth in this image is too narrow. It's about 18% too narrow compared to the death mask, just as the painting is. And if you trace the location of the eyes and the brows in the painting and the nose, you can see there's absolutely no match going on here. Look at the chin. The chin doesn't even match the height. So there's nothing about this image that matches the death mask at that scale. Now, you can use cephalometric landmarks on the CDV image, and you can then match the width of Joseph's nose in his death mask and the lower position. But when you do that, look where the eyes are in the mask compared. They're much higher in the painting, and look where the mouth in the painting is. It's much higher than the mouth in the death mask. So it doesn't have a correctly proportioned face. It's not anywhere close to being correct. Okay. Here, I've moved the camera closer to 0.75 meters away, right? Under 3 feet now. We're getting very, very close to the face. And you get a little bit better of a match. The mouth has risen up, but the eyes aren't any better. So if I keep coming closer with the mask to try to get the mouth closer to the nose by shrinking the overall, and again, the reason is because if you keep the nose width the same, the closer you get the camera to your nose, the wider your nose looks. And your nose just gets bigger and bigger relative to the other features of your face. So you have to fit the nose in the photograph, you have to, or the CDV, you have to shrink the mask. So I'm shrinking the mask, causing the mouth to get closer, but it's also pulling the eyes further away from the eyes in the CDV. And here it is at half a meter, like 1.5 feet, a little under 1.5 feet away. And it's even worse. The mouth is getting closer still. The eyes are even worse. And look at the width of the face and the cheeks. And the chin now matches too, by the way. This is a really great match to the chin. Okay. I'm going to show you another technique to show a problem with this image. In fact, this problem exists with the Library of Congress image. It exists with the painting of Joseph that hung in Emma's bedroom. It exists with the copy of the painting that Charles W. Carter made in Utah in 1885 of a daguerreotype. He made a photographic copy of a daguerreotype of the painting. And that is the shadow under the nose, Steve. Now, if you'll recall, once we had the 3D model of the mask, we can actually light the model to attempt to replicate shadows in any image of any purported image of Joseph. And here is the mask lit the closest I can get it to match the shadow size and shape of that shadow under the tip of Joseph's nose. here's the tracing of the actual shape of that shadow in the death mask. That red line is the death mask shadows. The yellow line is the target shape that I'm trying to match. This is as close as I can come. The problem is the shadow in the CDV and in the painting and in the Library of Congress image and in Carter's image doesn't represent a three-dimensional shape of Joseph's face at all. It is a flat attempt at an artist who doesn't know the three-dimensional shape of Joseph's nose to create a different shadow under the nose. He's attempting to make a shadow. This is a drawn shadow, not a shadow on the death mask. You can see it when I take away the mask and the line from that little dip into Joseph's philtrum is simply not there. That's because it's not a photograph of a three-dimensional, the three-dimensional shape of Joseph's actual face. That shadow cannot be replicated. Let's ignore for a minute all of the spatial dimensions problem. Even just the shadow under the nose cannot be replicated. Okay. And then again, let's ignore the fact that the mouth, if you shrink the mask by about 15%, I can get the shadows to be, and I can line up the mouth. You can see the nose doesn't match. You can see that the shadows above the eyes don't match. But not even the shadows at the lips correspond to the actual shadows caused by the light when you place it at its best possible match to the nose shadow. So this 100% is not a photograph of the prophet Joseph Smith. It does not match the dimensions of his spatial dimensions, vertical dimensions, and it doesn't match the three-dimensionality of his death mask at all. Okay? So if it's not a photograph of the prophet Joseph Smith, and it's not a photograph of the painting, what is it?
Yes, great question.
Well, here's my best guess. I think somebody, not knowing the problems with the painting, they wanted to make a photorealistic version of the painting. They wanted to provide a view of Joseph that had never existed before, not unlike what I have done or others have done by creating new art. And they went and they created this image of a person, not knowing that the nose is too tall, that the shadow under the nose is not three-dimensional, not knowing that the mouth is too narrow, not knowing that, there's all kinds of things, the width of the face and blah, blah, blah. There's all kinds of problems with, anatomically speaking, with this image. So on the possibility scale, this is also a 0. This is not a photo of the painting, but it matches all of the misproportioned details of the painting. Very, very interesting fact. In fact, if you look at it and compare this to actual photographs of people, I don't even think this looks like a photo of a person. It looks like someone has attempted, by creating some more art, attempted to create a photorealistic, like the hair. The hair is like crazy. Look at that hair on the left of the head. I'm going to go back here. Let's go back to that. That hair on the left, you just don't have scraggly. He looks like such coarse, thick, scraggly hair. Joseph's hair is described as fine.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, this is not
So
Joseph.
what okay, so the claim is made that this was found in an old photo album. When would the technologies capable of making a photo of
Oh,
this?
I don't know. This could be a late 19th century, early 20th century attempt at making a photorealistic, trying to imagine what it'd be like to see Joseph based off the painting.
Really,
Um,
how would they have been able to make? I mean, I've never even heard of something like this, like making a photorealistic picture. I thought that would be
oh
something
yeah,
like,
if you go and you look at experiments that people were doing, you can take the painting as a reference and you can redraw it. You can make we've even had people who've made mannequins, like in the early 20th century, late 19th century, people made mannequins taking the actual death masks and tried to make lifelike looking. I don't have an image of it available on hand quickly, but I've seen it. Someone created photos of Hiram and Joseph using their actual death masks, but trying to make them look lifelike by painting eyes in and putting them on bodies. And they look awkward. They look like mannequins, but people tried to pass that off as this is a photo of Joseph Smith. So people were experimenting with ways to try to imagine Joseph Smith. I
hmm,
don't know if this is, you can use Vaseline, we call it Vaseline, but petroleum jelly or other things to blur edges. And it could even have been a combination of, I don't know what, uh, a mannequin for a body, potentially, superimposed over a drawing, photographed, stacked on top of another photograph. That idea of stacking images has existed for a very long time. That was
Huh.
discovered very early on in the photographic process.
Okay, so this was
So,
this. I mean, if this is a turn of the century thing, I mean, kudos to them for making something uh, that on some level does look like a photograph. I mean,
yeah,
there is some.
it's not a half bad job.
No, it's actually
I'm
rather
impressed.
impressive. Yeah.
When we find out who made it and how they made it, I think I'm going to be fascinated to talk to that person for a couple hours just to understand exactly what they were thinking and what they did and what they knew and didn't know and how
Huh.
amazing it is. It's a very unique image. This is the only one of its kind. And it happened to come from Kim Marshall's grandmother's scrapbook, you
Huh.
know. And nobody knows where the original of this is or who created it. There's no information to tell us that. But again, the forensic evidence is simply this does not at all match the death mask. It doesn't even have the three-dimensionality of shadows that it should have at the mouth or at the philtrum or the brows. And therefore, even though it's not a photo of the painting, it is clearly derived from or based on the
Yeah.
painting,
Yeah, certainly.
clearly.
Yeah, clearly. Yeah. Oh,
All
interesting.
right,
Fascinating.
Steve, this next one we're going to talk for just a minute before we get rolling. Uh, this is a uh, CDV, carte de visite, owned by Deborah Hatfield. And she has a website called theprophetscars.com, which anyone is welcome to go check out. Her YouTube channel, she's changed her name so many times in the past 2 or 3 years. I don't remember what the name of it is now. When I made this slide initially about a year ago, she was calling it Studying Joseph Smith's Image and Life. Um, uh, I have to talk a little bit about Debbie for the following reason. About a week or two, I'm not even sure if it was 1 or 2 weeks after the Larson Daguerreotype was
Hey,
announced.
Curtis, if you're going to talk
Yeah.
for a few minutes about it, why don't you exit out of screen share just so because people are
Oh,
going to be watching on their phones and they're just going to
let's
see.
do that. Let's
So
do
just
that.
exit
Here we
out
go.
temporarily. Okay, so give us some background here.
So I want to maybe I should preface this by saying, well, let me tell the interaction, then I'll tell you why I want to talk about this for a little bit. Um, about a week or two after the Larson daguerreotype came out, I was pretty knee deep, and I had uh, come to believe this might be Joseph. By day 7, I was like, this might be Joseph. I didn't believe it was him, but I knew that it was a real possibility. I couldn't dismiss it, and the evidence was only mounting one direction. Um, I was very curious to know what people were talking about and saying about it. So I went on YouTube and searched, and I found this video of someone talking about the Larson daguerreotype. And it's late at night, 10:30 at night. I was doing dishes or cleaning something up downstairs, getting ready to go to bed in a few minutes. I was half listening in my earbuds. I wasn't even watching the video. And I hear this person say, and Curtis, what does he know? He's just a linguist or something like that. And I froze and I thought, wait, my name's Curtis and I'm a linguist. I work in language services for a living. I was like, wait, is she talking about me? So I hurry around it 10 seconds. And I was like, I think she's just talking about me. I was like, oh, what's going on? I was like, wait a second, who's this? And then I found a previous video in which she actually showed, purported to show a screenshot of an email that I had written. And I'm like glued to the screen now, my little tiny phone going, wait, who is this? Like, I never emailed this person. I don't know who this person is. And I honestly thought that she might have been making that up initially because I had zero recollection of this person. It turns out she was not lying. I had emailed her back in 2018, about 4 years earlier. Okay. And the way it happened was through some mutual connections. She had gotten my email address and emailed me and said, I have what I believe is a picture of Joseph Smith. She sent me a decently high resolution image of it. The one that I showed on the screen, I think, is that one. Or maybe it's anyway. She sent me a very decently high resolution image and asked if I'd be interested in helping analyze this image. And I told her yes. I kind of told her some basic things about me, why I got involved doing a study on the skulls and masks. I even made a comment to her that I can measure things down to the quarter millimeter in that email. And then when I told her essentially that I have no professional qualifications or training in this field, she basically said, "Thank you very much. I'm not interested in having you participate in this research by." And that was it. I had done a very preliminary comparison, which I just recently found in my archive on Dropbox of all my old files. I pulled it up and I was using morphological comparison, tracing shapes, and I thought, okay, uh, she's not interested. I didn't think anything of it for the next 4 years until I hear this woman talk about me and then show an email from me. Uh, anyway, so uh, Debbie has been very frustrated and very upset with all the evidence about the Larson daguerreotype because she knows that her picture is a picture of the prophet Joseph Smith. She's absolutely convinced. And I told her it didn't seem to match very well, just based off my initial analysis of the contour from the brow down to the nose, and then the shape of the lips and the size of the lips. But that I would do it a more in-depth research if she would send me the absolute highest quality image she had, because details matter. As we read from the Facial Identification Scientific Working Group guidelines, it matters detail and the quality of the image. So I just asked her for a higher quality image. She never sent it to me. And, she didn't want me to be involved. And I thought, that's fine. I had completely forgotten her name. I had forgotten about her image. I remember two people had approached me about images, Kim and then this other person, but I could not have told you her name to save my life, Steve, right? It was that long ago and that minor of an event in my life, right? Another not picture of Joseph Smith that I've been approached about. Um, Debbie has continued to talk about me and my research on her YouTube channel ever since our first interview. And I don't know that she was aware of it before. I may have tried to reach out. I've tried several times to talk to her. I've sent her emails. I've tried reaching out on social media. She likes to comment on my Facebook when I make it public or, on things. Uh, Sometimes she deletes comments. She's done that on your channel, posted a comment, then deleted a comment. I feel very concerned talking about Deborah and my relationship or interactions. Like, we don't have a relationship. I've never met her in life, despite her repeated claims that I was rude to her in person at the church history library when she was there one year. I don't even remember which year. It was a couple of years ago. I didn't even have a job in Salt Lake. I don't think I'd been to the library in probably a year or two or three when she was there. I've never met Deborah Hatfield in life. Now, the reason I'm hesitant to talk about it is uh, based off the things that she shares on social media and in her YouTube channel in particular. She's had a very hard life or has gone through a lot of trauma. And I have no ill will towards her, no bad feelings. At times I get a little frustrated with some of the things she claims about me. She said things like, oh, I don't know. Curtis Weber is using software that cost $50,000 that Dan Larson bought. I was like, hey, what? That was the first I'd ever heard of it. Dan Larson has never bought me any software, has never bought me anything. I've only ever licensed the use of his high resolution images of Larson Daguerreotype. And if Dan paid $50,000 for software, I feel sorry for Dan. I don't think any software for this study should cost $50,000. She's since changed that number to 5,000, so maybe she had a zero off or something. I don't know. I don't know what Dan has done. I've never asked Dan. Dan, did you actually pay $5,000 for software for your team to use on this? Because I've never used it. Again, she's claimed that I've been rude to her in person. She's claimed that I've attacked the experts that I'm about to talk about who have examined her image. And I have there's no personal attack here involved in any of this. I try to be, you, Steve, on your channel, you talk a lot about how we're all image bearers, right? We are all image bearers of God. We're all sons and daughters of God, brothers and sisters. And I feel that way about everybody in this story. I wish I could tell everything that I know about this whole story, all the behind scenes stuff. Some stuff I've shared with you, some I haven't. I try to be wise in what I share when. I want to make as much public as possible. And there are people who disagree, like DJ Bodden and others who disagree with my research. I love them all. I mean, I really do. I respect Deborah. If you go watch how much effort she's put into studying this image, I understand crazy and obsession, right? I get it. And so I have a lot of respect for Deborah. I just wish that she would talk to me. And she's unwilling to, and I understand that. I've stopped trying to contact her. She repeatedly has asked me, don't ever try to talk to me. Okay. She at one point started calling me he who shall not be named.
Okay.
on her YouTube channel. I know who that is. And it's like, okay, I'm sorry. So I tried to back off. So if she has made it through this far and wants to see if her image is actually going to be analyzed or not, I am going to analyze her image, despite the fact that she's protested and not wanting me to analyze it. She has backed off that, I think, in some of her videos. But she has made a public claim that this is a picture of the prophet Joseph Smith. So I'm going to show you my analysis of that picture.
Fair enough, fair enough. And I had some previous correspondence with Deborah in the past as well, and offered to facilitate conversations between the two of you, and even offered for her to come on my program. I don't know if she's blocked me or what, but Deborah, I mean, you're a fellow image bearer, and I have no malice towards you. And if you want to come on and talk about your photo, you're more than welcome to. And if you want to push back against Curtis, that's great. Okay, I just want to make sure that you know that, Deborah, and I'm not conspiring with Curtis on anything here. So.
Yeah, and you've never seen this evidence that I'm
Nope.
about to show,
And
this
just so people
analysis.
understand this, is that I am seeing this research for the first
All of
time
us.
as you're seeing it. So there's a lot to process here, and I imagine a lot of people who are going to be watching this are probably going to watch a half hour, pause, get back to it, pause, and think
You should
about
put
it.
chapter breaks in your video, Steve. Chapter breaks.
Maybe I could. Yeah, maybe I don't know. Maybe I will then.
Anyway,
But okay.
I do again want to just say that I have no ill will towards Deborah, and I understand that she doesn't want to talk to me, and that's fine. But um, I'm grateful. She has come up with some small details and historical things that are important and insights, and she's done some really nice work. So I tell people all the time. I showed you the link to her website. Go check out her work. Go watch her videos. They're fun because about 50% of them mention me at least once, sometimes in veiled reference or passing, but it's kind of fun to be talked about on YouTube. You're the only other person, I think, besides one or two other interviews out there. Uh, you don't have the privilege, Steve, of being the first video on YouTube with my name in the title. She actually had it first. So, and I didn't know it
Okay.
existed years ago. I don't know how long ago. So
Interesting. Fascinating.
7 doctors disagree with Curtis Weber, and then she's updated it to 8. And I mean, she might have updated it to 9 doctors. I was like, okay, great, about the skulls and stuff. I'm not going to get into all that now, but um, anyway, here we go. Uh, Now, I need to tell you that Deborah's picture was studied by 2 forensic anthropologists who she did not pay to do this work. Uh, their names are Tegan Lucas and Maichi Henenberg. And the three of them co-authored a paper that are published in a Polish online anthropological publication. And anyone can access it for free online. You just have to do a little search for, here's the title. People can go look for it or look by the authors' names. And they analyze this picture that Deborah purchased for about, I think she said $300 from someone off eBay back in I think it was 2018. She first saw it in 2017. And she's been studying it and believes that this is the prophet Joseph Smith. Now, in their paper, they conduct a morphological comparison that uses words. They also have some images with some arrows and some numbers pointing out the correspondences that match the numbered entries in the table here that has a section of 16 similarities and 4 differences. The 4 differences, they put forth possible explanations for why there are differences. The differences were not enough to these experts in this analysis to cause them to believe that this couldn't be Joseph Smith. They also, in the article, it's a very short paper, it's about 16 pages long, it's not terribly long to read. They also include one image showing one figure rather, showing 2 images of superimposition of the death mask and the CDV of this man that she calls 1840s Illinois man, is what Deborah likes to call it. And this is the text on the right on this slide is the only explanatory text in the entire article dealing with this image. And all they say is the anatomical points align with each other and there are no significant differences between points. Now, when I read this paper, I was very surprised by 2 things. First, that their morphological comparison was done with just words, no shape tracing, no specific real detailed analysis, just and the descriptions are very short. I'll go back to that in just a second. And that this is the only visual work, essentially, that they did comparing the two images. And Steve, what's really, I don't want to say, intriguing is not the word, and fascinating is the right word, and not concerning, but I questioned this immediately when I saw it. There are only 4 points analyzed, and those 4 points are little blurry dots. They don't even line up. There appears to be a red or a translucent, an opaque red or a partially transparent red, maybe a pink and green dots. You don't know which color is which from the mask or from the photograph, this purported photo. And not only that, and the points are not at all listed or labeled, but the image is distorted in the two. There is some perspective distortion going on, and they're not explaining why. If there might be some legitimate reason that they were testing, like I have done, different perspectives, but there's zero discussion of this in the paper to explain the difference. And it would be nice to know what details. Why are these images skewed? Why are they not preserving? Whenever I skew an image, I tell you exactly why I've skewed it and how by what percentage, right? And I show you the result. I show my work. I believe in showing my work up front. So I saw that, and I was very curious about the level of rigor or the lack of rigor that was evident in this paper to me. Now, their conclusion was not very strong either. This is the conclusion of their paper. I guess maybe it's an 11-page plus pages of footnotes. In conclusion, the author suggests that there is a high degree of anatomical similarity between the man in the CDV and the death mask of Joseph Smith Jr. However, without an unquestionable unique identifier or authentication of the original daguerreotype, the results of this analysis remain inconclusive. Without, however, ruling out the possibility of this being a photograph of Joseph Smith Jr., the American prophet. So I suspect this was, Debbie didn't write much of the paper apparently, but they gave her a credit on it. I suspect this was written by Dr. Hennenberg, who's not a native English speaker. The language is a little bit awkward. It's a little bit of a run-on sentence. But their conclusion doesn't seem very strong. They just said, it's inconclusive, but we can't rule it out. That's what it sounds like their conclusion is. Even though their title suggests that there's let me go back to the title. Oh, too far here. A morphological comparison between a death mask of the American prophet Joseph Smith and a photograph likely to depict him. That's the only place where they pronounce that conclusion. It's in the title of the paper, which I thought was strange that it doesn't seem to correspond closely to their concluding paragraph.
Makes you wonder if there's even a language thing going on here too.
Maybe, but it just didn't
the
seem
title
like a
does
very
not
strong conclusion.
the title
Right?
does not correspond with the conclusion, is what you're
Yeah.
saying. Yeah.
Now let's look at a little tiny bit at their morphological comparison. Cheekbones, prominent. That means they're both prominent in the death mask and in the photograph. The forehead height is high. The forehead width is broad. The frontal hairline shape is concave. The eyebrow shape is straight. You get the idea. The nose width is medium.
Yeah.
Steve, what's a medium nose width?
Yeah, right. This is not valuable information. This is not good data.
Now, I don't doubt that this should be and can be done, because I've done essentially the same thing with more description and more words.
That's
Like I would say,
yeah.
Yeah. But these very sparse 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 little word strings that describe, like the upper lip shape is flat and the lower lip shape is flat. Like what is flat? They're both curved. What do they mean by flat? It's not descriptive enough for me to know what they're trying to claim.
Exactly.
And in fact, I don't think their descriptions correspond with reality of the death mask in several instances. But there's a reason, and my initial gut reaction to seeing this was, how is that forensically rigorous at all, right? How is that reliable? How could you have any confidence in this type of simple analysis? Very simplistic, I should say, analysis. Well, imagine my surprise when I learned about a caution in using morphological comparisons and conducting them. Two forensic anthropologists were interviewed about a study they did back in 2015, Steve, which they conducted using biometric measurement a biometric measurement database. This happens to be a database of American military personnel who had their bodies and faces measured, which found that when 8 facial dimensions are measured in an individual, there is less than a 1 in 1 trillion chance of finding a doppelganger of that person. Okay, so that's the study they did. They used biometric measurements, actual measurements of people's faces. And they said, once you start stacking the correspondence, a number of measurements, 8 to be precise, once you get to 8 different measurements, the odds of finding some other human on Earth with those same exact 8 measurements is 1 in 1 trillion. It's actually less than 1 in 1 trillion. That was their conclusion. Now, in the same article, Steve, why did the researchers use biometric data instead of using morphological descriptions in their study? We just saw morphological descriptions in Dr. Lucas's and Dr. Hennenberg's and Debbie Hatfield's paper, right?
Mm-hmm.
Why did these two experts use biometric data instead of descriptions? This is a quote. The use of descriptive traits involves adjectives such as wide and curved, and I would add, or broad and flat or medium, right? To categorize facial features such as the nose, while metric traits most commonly involve measuring the distances between specific points on the face. Descriptives are not considered a reliable method of evaluation because a trait such as the color of someone's eyes is subjective. Well, color might be a little less subjective unless you're talking about a subjective description. Like we talked about, Joseph Smith's eyes are said to be blue or light blue. Some people said hazel or light gray, actually. Light gray, not hazel, light gray. One person said hazel. So those are, we've talked about that before. You got to use written descriptions with caution because they're subjective. Well, these experts have the exact same conclusion. Well, Steve, the co-author of the study was Dr. or Professor Maichi Hennenberg.
Okay.
And his study partner was Keegan Lucas, the two who wrote this paper about this CDV reported image of Debbie Hatfield's of Joseph Smith.
Okay.
I was stunned to find this. Like if they had just listened to themselves a little more carefully, they could have probably applied some more rigor and some more different types of morphological comparison to try to augment their simple written descriptions, right? And I'm not asking them to go out and do biometric measurements because that's really not possible in a photograph. That's photoanthropometry, and like I said, it's not recommended. It shall not be used according to the scientific working group, right? But I was stunned to find that. And in fact, this really is a very simplistic, low-level analysis of 4 correspondences, okay? So I thought I would do the same thing, except instead of, and here I'm going to rotate it to be symmetrical down the middle as I can and get the eyes level. That's the approximate mid-sagittal plane. This is one of the images that's hard to analyze because it's so blurry and overblown. It's overexposed, right? So there's a lot of detail missing. I'll illuminate the background so you can see a little bit better. I've identified 13 cephalometric landmarks that they could have identified in their paper. They did 4 right down the center of the face. Here are 13. And using the 3D model of the mask with all the principles we've talked about, this is the closest match that I've been able to come up with. And there are, this is my first attempt. There are 5 mismatches. I'll give 2 of them as possible exceptions. So there's at least 3 in this image. Here's the mask, moving the camera closer to try to get the nose to match the width of the nose in the photograph better. Here I'm at 0.75 meters. You can see the shift in size, right? It's getting the nose a little larger, but it's still not solving those mismatches. Here I'm half a meter, like 1.5 feet, 1.6 something feet close. And I'm getting a larger nose and I'm trying to keep the mask down the center of the face. I still can't match details sufficiently. And in fact, the height of the mouth is a huge problem, not only the width of the nose, but the mouth is not tall enough. And curiously, Debbie has even said that in a couple of videos. She knows the mouth doesn't match, but somehow still she thinks this must be Joseph. And this is the absolute clip. I've done over 70 attempts, over 70 combinations of mask rotations and camera distances. This is the closest I can get to matching. And I'm cheating by turning the face to try to get that right nostril closer to the photograph. And you can see the mask is now not split down the middle very, very closely at the nose. But let's just imagine that because the picture is overexposed, it's hard to get the rotation of the face in the image right. I still can't match 4 areas, even by cheating slightly by rotating the mask past what I think it probably is in the photo, the man's face in the photograph in the CDV. So, and I'm not going to show you. I could spend. I've done so much analysis on this picture, Steve. I've wanted Debbie to see it. I was going to send it all to her and say, Debbie, I wish I could tell you that you had a picture of Joseph Smith, but I see no forensic evidence, no solid forensic evidence that you actually have a picture of Joseph Smith. I've done the 3-dimensional correspondences. I wish I had time to put all those slides together by using the shadows like we did with the Larson Daguerreotype, and I cannot get the shadows to match. Simple, pure and simple. I can't even get the shadow on his eye. If you look at this man's, the shadow at his right eye, it's very deep shadow. I can't even get the shadow of Joseph's nose to fall that far into his eye socket. I think what this means, and I'd have to do further testing, it appears that this man's eye is much deeper in his eye sockets compared to his nose than Joseph's in his death mask. I can't even get close to matching just one shadow at the eyeball.
Hmm.
So the possibility score of this, the probability score, possibility score to me is pretty much 0 as well. If I could match, 80% of the face, if I could match, 80% of the shadows or 50% of the shadows, that the higher that number gets, the more that probability score would go up. To be fair, I should probably say there's like a 0.001% chance for all these pictures, right? Although I really think there isn't, based off the solid forensic evidence and the methodologies that I've employed. All right, that moves us on to the scannel daguerreotype. And Steve, I think you might be curious to see this
Yes,
because,
yes.
as you know,
Mhm.
this was first proposed back in 1994 as a photograph of Joseph, potential photograph of Joseph by Lachlan Mackay and Ron Romig from the RLDS Church. And Locke and Ron were the two who first studied the Larson daguerreotype and published a paper claiming that they thought, or I should say proclaiming that they thought that this was, the Larson daguerreotype is indeed a photograph of Joseph Smith. And then you were at the conference in Independence. Do you want to tell that part of the story right now?
Yeah, so it was actually the first time I think it was the first time I ever attended the John Whitmer Historical Association. It was in Independence, Missouri at the Temple. And so I was there when Locke and Ron were basically giving a presentation about the Joseph Smith photo, and then they brought this one on and basically said, "Yes, we believe this is a photograph of Joseph Smith." So I was the very first person to walk down to the aisle, get in front of the microphone, and just say, "Okay, so you are verifying right here, right now, that you believe that this is indeed a photo of Joseph Smith." Because basically, and the reason why this is important is that they wrote the paper in the mid '90s, and basically it was silence. Like there was nothing else said about this photograph, and there's reasons why, and I'm not going to get into that, but there was some pressures there that prevented this from being discussed. And so I thought that was very significant that the same people that wrote the paper identifying the Larson daguerreotype as being a photo of Joseph Smith 30 years previously were then also declaring this photo, and then just a couple of years ago we're back on saying, actually 3 years, yeah, about 2 years ago, saying now again that this is indeed a earlier photograph of a younger Joseph Smith. So does that cover it pretty well there for you?
Yeah, it does. That does. So my involvement in this is when I first became aware of this back in February 2008, when Andrew he had called me about a different purported photo, and then I learned about Shannon Tracy's books and about this image and so forth. And I was not convinced then. I could not fully dismiss it. Part of the problem is, and if I zoom in here on it, it's very blurry. There's a lot of tarnish on the surface.
Mhm.
It lacks a lot of detail that you would love to have. The detail again in the Larson Daguerreotype is just beautiful.
Mhm.
Um, but I thought this needs to be looked at a little more carefully than I was able to do prior to using the 3D model of the mask when I had limited images, no ability to account for perspective distortion and things like that. I'm going to back up one slide and just note that this is a rather it's like 3/4 half the body. You get a full sitting pose. His knees would be in that shot. This is a lot of picture for a daguerreotype, meaning the camera, because they didn't have zoom lenses back then, the camera is not up close to his face. It is moved back to capture more of his body. Now, I don't know the exact distance because I don't know the camera lens used. I would love to talk to daguerreotype experts to talk about what are the distances that a daguerreotype camera would be placed, because daguerreotypists today exist and they take portraits of people. How far back do you need to place a daguerreotype camera to get this type of pose? I'm guessing this is at least 6 or 7 or 8 feet back, right? It's not going to be a 2 or 3 foot, up close to the face because you're getting so much. If you put the camera that close, you're not getting anything but the face, not
Yeah.
even maybe the
Okay.
whole head, right?
Mhm.
So anyway, so I don't think perspective is going to matter that much because the camera appears to be pretty far back, and the further back you are, the less your eye can even notice the perspective changes, the distortions caused by the distance of the camera. Now, there's a couple other things that give me concern, or some pause, I should say. There seems to be, and it's hard to see because it's blurry, there seems to be a little bit of a shadow at the glabella that I have not been able to replicate using the death mask. Joseph has a very flat glabella, and this guy seems to have just a little bit more contour. I could be wrong. It's very hard to say because of the blurriness and the lack of distinct shadows and shapes in the daguerreotype. So I could be wrong about that. Uh, there seems to be a slight cleft in his chin, and that is neither in the death mask, either the pedestal or the divil, and it's not in the Larson daguerreotype. Now that again you know, could be a dirt smudge on his face. I don't know why you have him take a picture with his face dirty. It could be a flaw. It doesn't look like the other corrosion. It's a darkening that seems to imply a shadow. But I'll grant that that might be an optical illusion, right? So this is just a cursory look. That's like the assessment/review side of the analysis. But now I want to get into an examination a little more precisely. So here I've traced just the location of a few features: the shape of the lips, as close as I can get it, the shape of the nose, the base of the nose, and the nostrils. And then I've made little dots. I'm going to zoom in, little dots at the approximate center of the eyes. Okay. So I'll zoom back out. So it's hard to see, especially if you're on your phone, you're not going to see those probably. And now using the same techniques, I can attempt, and I have spent way too much time putting dozens and dozens and dozens of masks, maybe over 100 masks, trying to find a rotation, pitch and tilt that matched. And then I've done the camera distance far back, and I've come in closer and closer and closer. Here's the mask at best fit to the nose and to the mouth, and those are decent. Those are really decent matches at 4 meters of the camera distance, 4 meters from the center of the 3D rig. Uh, I'm going to zoom in, Steve, so we can talk about the eyes. In the daguerreotype itself, the death mask rather, I can trace and identify the high points of each eye, the approximate center points of the eyes, as we talked about last time, and I can trace the shape of the orbital bones. And then I can simply take the mask away and see how it compares to
Mhm.
the face in the scannel daguerreotype. Uh, the eyes are a little further apart in the scannel, it seems, and I could maybe be persuaded, that eyes were shifted in death that caused them to be more narrowly spaced in the death mask. But those that brow, that orbital bone is much, much higher,
Mhm.
way too high to be a correspondence to the bottom. Even it's impossibly high, right? And now I've tried by again playing with the distance. Here's 4 meters. I'm going to cut it down to 1.5 meters, and I'm again scaling to match the nose. Oops. Oh, I'm missing a bunch of slides here. Let's see if I accidentally hid them real quick, Stephen.
Okay.
Oh, I I must have accidentally deleted them. I don't see them. What has happened here is the location of the eyes has lowered slightly. It hasn't gone up. So getting closer to the mask doesn't solve the problem of the proportions. It only exacerbates the issue. The closest I can get is that 4 meters that I showed you there. You have to, excuse me, that's not four. There we go. Sorry. 4. That's the closest I can get the mask to fit. Now, in any of these examinations that I've done and showed you these analyses, if others can do in a forensically rigorous manner and show me a better fit of each mask on each of these photos, I'd be more than happy to learn that and then to replicate it and say, oh, they're right. I didn't account for this, right? I I should have gone 10 more attempts to find the best match. But I've done dozens, if not scores, if not in a few cases, hundreds of mask comparisons to these images. And I cannot find ways to make these images fit, match the mask. So I'm giving the Scannell
Hmm.
daguerreotype a 0 possibility score.
Huh.
There's just no way that as a younger Joseph, his orbital bones were that much higher above his nose and his mouth than they are in his daguerreotype and in his death mask, right? And of course, that brings me to talking just in conclusion. I'm I've said this in your last interview, but I'm giving the possibility score. I have this much confidence in the evidence. This is 100%. It's not 99.9. It's not 99.9999. If I could go higher than 100, I would say, yeah, this is absolutely is. And that confidence that I have, some people have thought it is like arrogance or ignorance, or it's 100% driven by the evidence, the correspondences that I can show in both 2D, but more especially, even if we had nothing but the 3D model, no paintings, no descriptions, nothing else, three-dimensional correspondences, as we talked about in our last interview, are what caused me to believe that this absolutely is a photograph of Joseph Smith. I wish again I could go to Kim and Debbie and anyone else who has a purported photo of Joseph and say, hey, you have one too. That's amazing. I would love to have 4 or 5 or 6 or 7 or 10 photographs of Joseph Smith, but there's only one in existence that we know of. And to hope beyond hope that there's another one that hasn't been, discovered in the 100 now almost 81 years. I guess it's been now 181 years since he was killed. Seems quite impossible to me. And I'll just again show the AI enhanced and touched up version that I've done with Joseph Thoreen, and just encourage people, if they're interested in following my research and learning more about things that I'm discovering, they're welcome to join my little emailing list, and I'll let you know when I have updates on further research I'm doing on these topics. So that's my story, Steve.
All right. And we did it under 2 hours, around 2 hours. So you told me two-ish. I was thinking it would be more like three-ish. So this was great. Why don't you exit out of the screenshot? Everybody, make sure you get that scan the QR code there to get on his mailing list. Um, Curtis, I want to thank you so much for doing this. We've spent so much time with each other, whether it's on camera or off camera. We've developed a good friendship. There were times when you were unable to present stuff here on the channel. I will tell people that behind the scenes, there's just so much going on when it comes to these photographs, and there's a lot of drama, and there's politics, and there's a lot of passionate people involved in this, and passionate for the right reason. They love um, they love the restoration. They love Joseph Smith. Um,
I have to
they,
say, Steve, I've had uh, so many wonderful interactions and only a small, like one
yeah,
or two negative interactions with people about this.
yeah,
And I feel bad for those negative interactions because they're not coming from me, right? I don't feel negative towards people.
yeah,
Look, people don't have to believe my research because I told you before, my mom said, Curtis, what does it matter? What does it matter which skull is his? What does it matter what he looks like? And there is a level on which that is 100% true, right?
yeah,
It's like
yeah.
no one's salvation, no one's friendship should be ruined because someone either believes or doesn't believe some fact or not about something or other. Now, I want people to see the forensic evidence and to be able to make that decision. I know many people will never see it or will simply not consider it carefully. They have their we're crazy humans, right? Sometimes we get something in our head, and it doesn't matter how many facts come contrary to the idea in our head, we're going to stick to that thing, right? Uh, I can imagine ex-Mos, post-Mos, and never-Mos listening to a faithful believing member of the LDS Church saying that out loud, saying, "Wake up! You don't you see you're saying that about yourself?" You know, it's like I get it, right? I do. I follow a lot of that world and Joseph Smith apologetics and Joseph Smith criticisms and attacks and so forth. I get it. But this to me, this is forensic. This is as close to hard science as you're going to get in this field, especially those three-dimensional correspondences. And if you, that can't sway you even just a little bit, I have to wonder, like, are you really looking at it? And, you know, some people don't understand it. It's not in their wheelhouse. They don't have a background. They're like, I'm not an expert. I don't understand it. I can't make a decision. I get that. I get that. That's fine. But be nice to people. You know, some people have mistreated, according to Deborah Hatfield, have mistreated her about this. And I feel very badly for her, for anybody mistreating anybody about this topic. We talked about it being image bearers, you know, Steve. You and I come from different walks of life in many
Yeah.
respects,
Hmm.
but we can respect and be kind to each other and interact with each other. Even if I watch an interview where you say something that I disagree 100% with, it doesn't make me dislike you or hate you or feel like I got to put you down in some way. And the same is true of Debbie Hatfield or Kim Marshall or, you know, David Lindsley or DJ Bodden or anybody else in this topic. I'm thrilled to be involved in it and to have met the people that I've been able to meet, people like you and so many others. It's just been a wonderful blessing in my life, and it hasn't been as dominant in the last year and a half as it was in the
Hmm.
first year and a half. Um, but a lot of this work I had done before and had just been not showing because I've been spending so much time on the Larson Daguerreotype. But again, I'm just stunned that it exists and can say out loud to people that we have a photograph of Joseph Smith.
It's been quite a journey, to say the least, and it's been really an honor and privilege for this channel to be the leading channel regarding the Larson Daguerreotype. I'm sorry to hear about the scandal image because, man, I've talked to people who've advocated for it, including, but I do find it very interesting that Lachlan, of course, who I know, he hasn't come on any programs to talk about the scandal image like he did Larson Daguerreotype. And it seems to me like that announcement was made at Whitmer, and we haven't really heard anything since. So I don't know what's going on there, but I found it interesting that they decided to announce both, a second photograph when they were talking about the Larson Daguerreotype, and I don't know what's happened with that research. So, guys, if anybody's involved in the scandal image and all these other images, and you've done, maybe you've come up with some new research, maybe you're holding on to some research, maybe you're holding off from maybe you're publishing something, please reach out to me, even if it's just behind the scenes you want to talk and kind of give me an update on what you're doing. I'd be very interested to hear what you have to say. Again, this is the Switzerland of Mormonism. We do want to talk to everybody, and I would invite advocates for all the photographs that we talked about today that want to come on to show their findings. You have an open invitation. Reach me at mormonbookreviews@gmail.com, or for friends on Facebook, ding me on Messenger, and I'll get you my cell phone number and we'll start talking, and let's see if we can continue the dialogue. Maybe one
And
day we
I'm
can.
interested in that too, Steve. Like,
Yes.
if people have evidence that I have not seen or have not discovered that either controverts or seems to contradict or proves wrong something that I've shown to the world, I'm 100% committed to evidence. But I am going to test and see how forensically rigorous any claim is, and I want to understand the claim. I don't want to straw man anyone's arguments. I want their
Right.
strongest evidence in their arguments about it. And I'll look at it with as open a mind as I can because I I believe in evidence. That evidence has driven me in this story. As you know, I've completely flipped my views on is there a picture of Joseph Smith or not, solely based on the evidence of the Larson daguerreotype.
Yeah.
So,
Well, who knows? Maybe there. I tell people there's things stored in attics in Independence, Missouri, that will be found and will forever
yeah.
change the course of the restoration. Don't forget, you all in Utah, that you got a lot of restorationists who were there in the beginning, who stayed in the Midwest, and we need to honor them because, again, that was found by, that was that daguerreotype was from in the RLDS context. And I think that there's probably more things out there that are going to be discovered, and maybe there will be other photographs, who knows, or other things, but maybe descriptions of the photograph that are contemporary. All these kind of things, I think there's still a possibility this information's out there. So, hey, if you're out there, no matter where you're at, go up in the attic, go check, see if he has some documents, photographs, whatever. It's very exciting when these new things are done. Curtis, I just want to thank you so much for the work that you've done. I want to thank you for our friendship. And was there any final words you wanted to share with the audience?
Uh, no, I'll just say thank you to everyone who's interested and who comment and who care enough to follow this work. I'm happy to share it with the world.
Awesome. This is great, folks. We're going to have links in the description to whatever we talked about. Maybe, Curtis, I could include your email in there too, into the description. So for those of you who'd like to contact you directly, of course, he's got the QR code. Make sure you go rewind and hit that and to get on the newsletter to get the latest developments of his work. And we do have links in the description for those of you who would like to financially support us. Please, we do appreciate the donations. Couldn't do it without you. I'm going to try to get out to Whitmer this year. I don't know for sure if I'll be able to do it, but I don't think I'm going to be able to get the Sunstone, but maybe Whitmer this year I'll be able to get to, and I'm excited about that as well. But again, the most important thing is this: all the voices of the restoration will be heard here on Mormon Book Reviews.